Hey there, and welcome to Becoming a Bowhunter. I'm your host, Matty, and join me and our guests as we take the quality of meat back into our own hands. Searching the wild for free-ranged animals to harvest as ethically as we can. I interview a variety of specialists from the bow hunting community to help fast-track your journey as a bow hunter. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this chinwag on one of your favorite topics in the world, bow hunting. Hey team, welcome. This week is a solo-sode, so just me. I'm going to give a little recap on what I went through with the Raw. And I mean, to have a spoiler alert for you, I was not successful, but I did come across a lot of deer and I had some pretty incredible encounters. So I'd like to kind of talk about them and talk about what I went through, I guess, as I went there and how I'd maybe change it for next time, what I'd do different. The biggest thing I think I would change coming into it next year will be having more time to actually apply to it, maybe just setting a week out straight. I mean, I probably had maybe, I can't remember, I think it was about, realistically, maybe 6 days in total, but it was over a few different weekends. So each time I had to regroup and regather where the deer were, and that would obviously take up a lot of time. And once I'd found them, then it was about setting it up. And I don't know. I definitely, it wasn't until I took a guy out over Easter, so he's there, he's part of the family, and we went out he had his rifle and I went out with my bow. And it wasn't until I took him out that I actually had confirmation of how bad the wind is on the property that I'm on. And I've never had it be that bad on the day that I took him out. It was literally like you'd walk 50 meters or you'd walk for 2 minutes and the wind that was literally in your face would be up your ass all of a sudden. So, I mean, that's just to give you a little bit of an understanding as to what I am dealing with. It is pretty hilly. It is pretty ridgy. And that's not an excuse. It just makes me want to get there even more. But, I mean, when it came to the Raw, actually, before I get into that, if you guys do have a story you want to submit to the podcast, so a little hunting story, that would be sick. Please do send that to me. It's Matty at becomingabowhunter.com. Otherwise, if you guys do have any guests that you want to hear from, I have been ridiculously busy recently. Life has just got the best of me. So I'm just kind of, I guess, trying to keep afloat right now. And so I do have a fair few guests coming up, but my outreach protocol or program has not been as good as it has been previously. So I am still getting some people for you. Don't worry. There definitely is still a lot of podcasts coming. I'm trying to get some women on board. And I've actually got a lady who is saying yes, but there's been a few that have said yes and then flaked out when it comes to the actual crunch time. So hopefully she follows through. As a lady from the States. So hopefully she comes through. That would be sick. But yeah, if you've got any guests you'd like to recommend or people you'd like to hear from, I would love to hear from you because that obviously what you guys are interested in. That's what I do want to talk about. I do have some cool stuff coming up, but that's to come. So talking about Raw Recap. So I'm chasing red deer up here. I'm in Brisbane. I go up to Gympie or just outside of Gympie to go hunting. I'm incredibly lucky to have access up there, and it's kind of something that I just try to get out to as much as I can. But unfortunately, life gets in the way when you've got a business, when you've got a wife and a dog, and we've got a kid on the way. Obviously, everyone's got their own things that happen. And that's what my life is. And so that's why I'm probably not getting out as much as I'd like, but I don't think anyone probably is getting out as much as they would absolutely love to be out and about and in the bush. So when it came to, I guess the big thing is, so James Doomstis and I went out. We talked about it on episode, I think it was episode 7 or episode 8. We talked about it as something about, the title was something along the lines of our learnings from the weekend hunt. So head back and hear that. We did talk about the red deer that we came across, and I drew back on, but unfortunately did not get a shot away on. And so that was my first in the flesh raw experience where a deer was out there roaring, and I put in some voice clips was really cool to actually hear. So we heard him roaring, we heard him barking, and I'm gonna talk about both those things during this episode. But that was kind of my first thing in the flesh. So I was like, okay, I don't really know what to experience, or I don't really know what my experience is going to be like moving forward into it. And it was a fortnight after that. So after I left James, or after James left us, he went off to a property at Kilcoy, I think it was, and he was successful in his red hunt, which is awesome because I've been reaping from his reward, which is a whole heap of red deer meat, which I've been loving. And if you want some delicious recipes, they are on my YouTube channel. They're up there and they're ready to roll, but they're both really incredibly nice. If you ever want to introduce someone to some venison, you want to get rid of the gamey taste, and I think the reds are probably a little bit gamier than maybe something like the fallow or the chitala. So if you're in that instance, then definitely check these out. One's a masala dish, and one's like I don't know what you call it, like a red wine sort of slow cooked dish. So yes, they are both very delicious. But anyway, getting on to it. So I went out and I couldn't get out there. I was meant to get out there on the Friday afternoon. Shit happened, life happened, and I just I couldn't get there when I needed to. So I ended up going out late Friday night. So because I was only there for the weekend, it meant that I was only going to get Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, and Sunday morning to get out and about and go hunting. I then had to drive home, get myself set up for the week, and make sure that I'm still doing life as well. So when I got out there Friday night, it's pretty late. I'm like, I just need to get to sleep as soon as I can. Obviously, I'm seeing my family when I get out there, so I'm responding with them and also like catching up with them, obviously. But getting into it, it ended up being a pretty late night, I guess is what I'm trying to get to. So going into the next morning, my plan was to get up and get out and about probably about an hour before sunlight. So I did that. I managed to do that. I was out in the paddock an hour before sunlight. And I guess to kind of set the scene for you, the property I hunt is it's like a split property, 2 sections. The house paddock and then the back paddock, which is where I go hunting. And so I left the house paddock. I can't even remember what time. It would have been like maybe 4:30 or thereabouts. And I'm pretty sure around this time, sun up, like first light, was around 5:30. So that's when I got there, I think was about 4:30 or thereabouts. So I got into the back paddock and it's still pitch black. You've still just had a sky full of stars. And I actually want to retract that statement because I can't remember what the sky was, but I remember it being dark when I got there. So I can't remember if the stars were out because this is one thing I do wish I had done is written down where the moon was at, what the moon was doing, and what the weather was like. It was cool. It was definitely cool, but it wasn't freezing. So I got there. I pulled up, and you come across the grid, and I usually park my car right there, just off of the road. So just to set the scene, I park my car to the right of the road, and right there so all along the right side is a big paddock, and it eventually comes up into like this hill/ridge. So just keep that in mind because I'm going to talk about that a bit later on. Over to the left, on the left-hand side is still a part of this paddock and for about 20 meters or so. Then there's a fence and it goes up into this big paddock, which we call the scrub paddock. And it's just got all these ridges leading up into this hill or to this mountain. And that's where we've seen a lot of sign. That's where James and I saw a heap of rubs. So that was kind of the game plan. As much of a game plan as I had was to just kind of hit that section. So I get there, I pull up out of my car, I jump out and I sit on my bonnet just for a sec, just to kind of see if there's any noises or any sounds. And literally straight away, like they're just calling, just roaring, boom, boom, boom. There's a heap of them. I was like, holy fuck, like this is insane, absolutely insane. Sorry for the swearing, but it was insane. It rocked my world. I was like, where have these deer been? And I'm so happy that they're here now. And it was like, where I was, there's probably 2 or 3 little valleys between where I was and where I think they were. So I kind of was excited. I'm like, hell, what do I do? I'm just going to grab my pack. I'm going to get my bow and I'm going to get onto it. So they are all up in the valleys and the ridges of what I called the scrub paddock. So on the left-hand side of the road. So I left my car on the right-hand side. So I grabbed my pack. I grabbed my bow. My pack, by the way, is just like a Reebok bag. It's just like a sports bag. It's a black bag. It does the treat. It's actually really sick. But anyway, just saying you don't need to necessarily have a camo pack to go out. So I get off after it. I started walking down the road to start with, so just trying to be a little bit quieter. I walked down the road for probably 20 meters, and I hear something crash off up this little valley. So I'm literally, where you park the car is at the bottom of one of the valleys of the ridge, and literally there was something there that just crashed off up the hill, and it sounded just like a deer. It was so dark that I couldn't see. I couldn't see the movement. Usually you can hear the difference between what a kangaroo might sound like and what a deer might sound like, and it was definitely not a kangaroo, and there was no cattle up there, so my only thoughts is that it could have been a deer. So I was like, whoa, this is insane. This is going to get hot quick. So I started walking up into that paddock. Then I'm like, I need to be in that paddock. I need to be venturing around through the ridges there, obviously. So I've jumped the fence. I've headed up into it, and it's still just so pitch black. I'm just trying to kind of find my way by feel. I'm not turning on any torches because I don't want them to know that I'm close by. I don't want to allude to them that I'm there. And I just start to make my way through, all while they're just going mental, just crazy, just yelling out to each other. And it seemed like, from what I could gather, there was probably like 4 or 5 going at each other across. There's definitely 4, maybe more. And I only found that out later. But I kept kind of cruising over, and I got into this valley. And I was in the valley, and on the other side, there was definitely a deer. Like, it was so loud that there's no way that he couldn't have been just there. And to this point, I had never tried to roar before. I'd never tried to do a male call. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. There's no way I'm going to scare these guys off by doing that. But I had practiced my hind calls, so I was like, I'm just going to try that. I'm going to let out some hind calls and see how I go. So I'm sitting there, letting out some yells. Yeah, yeah. Just doing all these little calls. They probably sound a bit better on the day, hopefully. But I pretty much tucked myself into this little section where it was like a perfect little crossing of where I thought he would come in if he was to come and follow the sound. And so I'm letting off all these little noises, and nothing happened. It was literally like just on first light, so you still couldn't really make out what was happening, but it was like light enough that you could just see bits and pieces coming through. So I'm sitting there and making these calls, and he'd go quiet for a bit, then he'd respond, and then he'd kind of keep responding, but I feel like he was actually responding to the other blokes over the hill. So he would just kind of keep roaring out to them. I'm letting off these calls, just hoping that there's going to be a deer step right into me. I'm like, yes, this is so good. This is going to be so easy. And it definitely was not. I was yet to find out. So I think I was there for probably a good like 20 minutes until the sun actually came up. So this has already been maybe like 30 minutes, 40 minutes into it. So the sun's just coming up. And I decided I'm going to try to find the closest stag. And at this point, the guy that was over the ridge from me sounded like he was starting to get away from me, sounded like he was trying to move towards the other boys. But this one kind of let a call off from or near the ridge of the paddock that I was talking about before. So what I did was I started to make my way back down to the fence line. So I've crossed over the valley, come up to the fence line. I start walking across the fence line, and they're still just roaring this whole time. They're just going at it. It was absolutely bizarre. And there's this one that seems like he's just over the hill. So I had to cross the fence, cross the road, cross the hill, and that's where I'd be able to find him. So I start walking up the fence line, and out of nowhere, I hear, bark, bark. That's them meant to be barking, just so you can depict what's happening. So I hear this barking. I'm like, oh no, because when the stag had barked at us the previous fortnight ago, when I was with James, he's like, that's terrible. You don't ever want that to happen. And so I'm like an hour deep into my hunt, and I'm like, I've just ruined my whole chance of anything. So I was kind of just really down on myself straight away because I could not see these deer at all. This ridge or this mountain where I was trying to get to the other side of is thick, like really thick. So I was in probably just under waist high grass. And so I just knelt down. I'm like, I'm just going to sit here for a bit. It barked for a few more times, and I was just glassing the mountain, just trying to see where the hell it was. And I'm talking like maybe 100 meters away from me, 80 meters away from me. Like, it's not that far to get under the fence, across the road and over the mountain, or onto the mountain at least. And so it barked a few times, and then it just went quiet. And I just sat there just for probably like 2 minutes glassing. And then, like a stampede, literally 6. So there's 5 hinds, 1 spiker, and then 1 decent stag, but he was young. And they all just came rushing out of the hill. They run straight to pretty much where I was. I got my rangefinder out. It was 50 meters. I found out later. But 4 of the hinds jump underneath the fence, or it's kind of like the fence has been twisted over. I don't know if that is from the deer or not, but it's literally like you've got one of the fence wires, the middle 2 fence wires, you've kind of tied them over each other, so they're just kind of twisted up and up high. And so I watched these 4 hinds jump under. The spiker jumps under, but the stag is too busy chasing after this girl. So he chases her up the fence line, all the way up the fence line, up the hill, away from where I am. So the opposite direction to where I am. And these hinds and the spiker, they jump through the fence. They're still kind of like, they were at 50 meters when they started, then they got out to about 60, 70, 80, and they just kind of kept moving out. But they started to slow down because he wasn't heckling them anymore. And they probably got to about anywhere between 80 and 100 meters. So probably, I would say like maybe 3 to 5 minutes later. Like, it felt like a lifetime because I was sitting there trying to figure out a game plan, trying to see what to do. But that obviously, it might have even been shorter, to be honest, because that can go so quick. And I was just about to make a move, and I look back up the hill along the fence line, and here he comes, poof, 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 sprinting back down the hill. And he's just got his head up high. His antlers are just shaking about as he runs. Like, he's literally. So I don't know if you guys have seen any of my videos, but the YouTube videos where I've got the deer head behind me. So it's probably like that. So he's a pretty young guy, but he's got 5 on one side and 7 on the other when it comes to his actual spikes, or his antler spikes. So his tines. So when it was very similar sort of shape in this guy. And so I've got really excited. I've drawn back. I'm like, just in case he comes closer than 50 meters, because at this point I hadn't put my 50 sight in. I hadn't put that pin in, but to be honest, I wasn't confident taking that shot. So I wasn't ever going to take it. I drew back more so in case he came up in my direction, like came closer. But so he jumped under the fence 50 meters. And he's walked out a little bit. I'm like, what do I do? Like, he's going to run away. So I let out a hind call. And he stops. And he just kind of looks back at me. Looks around for a little bit. Looks up the hill where all the other girls are and where the spiker is. And just takes off. And so I let out like 2 more little hind calls. And nothing. He just kind of kept going. He was like, nah, these other girls are obviously letting off scents for him or something. I'm not sure. And so he was keen on them. And so he ran up the hill, and I actually didn't really see him anymore. By this point, they were starting to get more distant. So the actual roars are getting a bit more distant. So I'm like, I need to figure out a new game plan. So I'm sitting down at the bottom of this scrub paddock where the fence line is. And pretty much from where I am to where the back of the scrub paddock is, or where the mountain is that's the back of the scrub paddock, is literally, I'd say maybe a K to get to the back of it, but it's all uphill. And so I'm like, look, the only way I'm going to get to do this is if I go up the hill. I'm going to have to go up and try get them on the ridges. So by this time, it's pretty strong daylight. Like, you can see what's going around you, but it's pretty thick country up these hills. So I start trekking up, and this is where the wind gets pretty stuffy, because you start to go up and you'll get up onto like or close to the top of one ridge, and that's when the wind will change on you. And if you pop over to the other side of the ridge that you're on, then the wind's completely different once again. And so I'm kind of cruising up, and these ridges, it's like a whole heap of valleys and a whole heap of ridges that make the base of the mountain. You come up into it, and it's about a kilometer of that where you then get to the base of the mountain. So I'm kind of just going up, just listening out for calls, and the roars are starting to come less and less, but they're still out and about, and it seems like they're still trying to get after each other. So I'm climbing up, going up these ridges, getting over closer to where they're calling. At this point, I hadn't seen any other deer, and I was just following the roars. So I just kind of keep following up. Once again, I'm not roaring myself. I'm just following up the different roars that are going on. So I get up to the top of where the ridges are and kind of keep following around, and I'm at pretty much where the base of the mountain is. But now what happens is you can go either direction for about a kilometer, and based on where where that paddock is or where the fence line is. So I start making my way over towards where the deer are, where I can hear the roars going on from. And I just keep crawling my way around, or not crawling, but making my way around. The issue with this part of the paddock is that it's not ever seen to the cows. The cows, when they're in there, they don't pay attention to where it is because it's too steep for them, I'd say, or there's just not enough grazing food for them. So the grass that's there is incredibly long, and there's a fair bit of water that was coming off at that time. So it was almost like reeds that were standing up every once in a while. So you'd walk through, and it's just like the really noisy shh, shh, shh as you walk through it. So I was kind of coming across a fair bit of that and making my way around the hill. And by this stage, I think I heard the last roar would have been about maybe 8:30. By this stage, it's getting close to 9:30. I'm over where I think he is, like roughly where I heard his last call from. I can't see him at all. I'm like, I don't know, maybe he's bedded down. I've got no idea. I don't really know what to do. So 9:30-ish, I think, is when I packed it in. I'm like, I'm going to go home. I'm going to maybe just reach out to some people and figure out what I should do and make my game plan for later on this afternoon. So by this stage, it's heated right up. It's very, very quite toasty, really quite toasty. And so I make my way back to the car, still just keeping my eyes out as I go. So get back to the car, end up going in helping out with some work on the farm, and I ended up contacting, or James Doomstis actually called me, which was very handy. He's like, dude, it was very handy because he'd been to the property. So he's like, dude, I think this is what you should do, and gave me a bit of a game plan. He's like, what you need to do is go and hit the bottom of these mountains, which is a different mountain completely. He's like, you should go hit the bottom of that, the base of that, and just let out some roars all afternoon. I'm like, fuck, I've never roared before. Like, we went out together one night and he did a whole heap of different roars. And I tried once, and I was like, no, that was not for me. And so what I ended up doing was I just watched the video a heap that's on my Instagram page of when I was stalking in on that guy roaring in the dam. I just started mimicking that, and I just kept mimicking it, and playing with it kind of all afternoon until 3 o'clock rolled around, which is when old Kevy Shelf says that it's deer o'clock. So I'm like, perfect, it's time to go out. So I get out there again. I'm all keen to hit this ridge of where I think he is, where I think he's bedded down and left. But by this stage, James has crushed my dreams and said, hey, dude, they probably wouldn't have bedded down there. Like, they'll stop roaring. They'll keep moving. They'll find somewhere probably better to bed down than where you're saying. I'm like, bugger. So anyway, I go with the game plan to go and pretty much see try find him where I left off, essentially. I get there and the winds are absolutely terrible, like do not favor what I was trying to do at all. No matter which direction I was trying to head in, it wouldn't have really worked. So I'm like, okay, I'll go with James's plan. So I went to the back, like the complete back end of the property, and there's another ridgeline there, another mountain. And so I got to the back there and I started letting off some calls, letting off some roars, nothing to be heard, nothing to be seen. So I went for a walk, ended up getting messed up by the winds a bit over that side as well, but just kind of did my thing, just kept walking around as much as I could, getting around that base of the ridge and glassing up the ridge mountain, like the ridge wherever I could, trying to get some eyes on wherever I could. And to be honest, I had no luck that afternoon, like no movement. The wind picked up pretty big by the afternoon. And I kind of I don't know. I kind of was a bit off it by that stage. I was like, oh, compared to the morning, like where it was so hectic, how many calls there were. I was like, it's like maybe it's just a morning thing. I don't know. Like I had no idea, and I found out later it's not. But just for that day, they were obviously done for that day, or they were off on the other mountain only. And so I was like, I don't know. This is probably 3 hours in the making, 4 hours in the making of me walking around. Probably 3 hours because the light would have run out. So I ended up making my way home, having dinner, getting another decent night's sleep, and heading out pretty early again. And the next day, I was like, my game plan was to go and sit by that crossing, the fence crossing, where they'd kind of ducked under and where I'd seen them. I'm like, well, if I've seen them there, they're probably going to run by that again. So I went and sat there, and I was there before light once again, probably only like half an hour before light. So I sat there for probably like maybe a good 45 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. Like there's probably sunlight for at least 30 minutes before I moved. I made sure I stayed there for a while, and there was nothing, no movement, no sounds, no nothing. I was like, oh no, what's happened? Like I actually started thinking I had scared all of them off from the day before in the afternoon when I went back and did my roars. Because I think as I went home, I jumped out of the car, and even though the winds would have been blowing up the ridge, I just wanted to do some calls just to kind of see if there was anything out and about. And once again, there was just no sound. So I'm like, whatever. So the next day, my thought pattern was I've fucked it by, sorry for the swearing once again, I've stuffed it by standing at the bottom of the hill and roaring with the wind in my back. So I was like, oh no, what have I done? I'm like, there is a little eating ground, like a feeding ground, where I find hinds pretty regularly. I've seen them there a fair bit. I'm like, I'm just going to make my way over there, and I'll let a few roars out as I go, and I'll see if there's anything up there. So this is once again across from the hill where they were barking at me from. I pretty much have to go over that hill, and that's where the feeding ground is. So I start to make my way across. I kind of get up on top of the hill, I think, before I let out any calls, and I let out a roar. And no, I had let out some roars before then. And so I got there and I let out another roar. And once again, still nothing. But I thought I heard something like a stick crack or something like that. I was like, oh no, what's happened here? So I was really patient. I sat there for probably a good 5 to 10 minutes before I made my next move. And then I started to move nice and quietly around, just because there was kind of some lantana bushes just around the side of me. And there's in my head, I was like, there's a fair chance there's something just sitting around the corner there that I've gone and scared. So I just sat down and just waited for a bit. Anyway, I got moving, and pretty much where I'm looking is to my right and down. And there's like a big paddock there, like a big feeding lot, probably, if you were to measure it across, maybe like 100 meters wide and probably like 200 meters long. And so I'm kind of just looking through this section. There's still bushes and trees throughout it, but it's just pretty open. So there's a fair chance that they can get a fair bit of grass, like fresh feed there. So I start walking out, and then boom, I see them. There's, I would say, the same hinds I saw the day before in the spiker. I'm like, yes, my chances could not get any better. This is unreal. And they haven't seen me yet, which is even better. So I get in behind this bush. There's literally a bush that's between me and them, and it's about maybe 20 meters from them. So I'm like, if I can get to that point, I'm probably going to get a really good shot on. And to be honest, like this would be my first deer. I was in the stage where I was like, I'm going to take that spiker. Like as far as I'm aware, the small younger deer are incredibly good eating. I'm like, that's perfect. That would do me just fine. So I start making my way across, and there is a little road that runs right through the middle of this. It's just like a little dirt track. So I'm just cruising across, and I get maybe like 5 meters from the road, maybe a little less. So I'm about 40 meters from the deer now. And the winds are blowing right in my face, and they're blowing pretty strong. I'm like, okay, I'm in a really good place here. I start walking, and this hind pops her head up, and she does like a little, it was almost like a side-to-side dance. Like she almost like, boom, like a jump. And I just looked at her like I've never seen that before. And I haven't spent a lot of time with them. I haven't seen them a heap, but definitely that was something weird. And she kind of looked around at the others, and she ran off. She just ran like maybe 15 meters away. And she stopped and looked back at them. And she ran back to exactly where she was, did the same little like little side hop. Like it's kind of weird. I don't know how to explain it. It's almost like a lateral hop, jump from one space to another. And then she took off around all of the deer, ran around them all, ran back to her original spot, and then they all just took off. They ran up away from where I was. And I was like, that was bizarre. Like the wind is in my face. There's no way they could have smelt me. I'm still far enough away from them that they definitely could not be seeing me. They ran up a little bit and they stopped and they looked back in the direction, not where I was, but probably maybe 50 meters off to my right. And they were kind of following something. So I look across and sure enough, there's these two dingoes. They're coming right for me. And I'm like, fuck, what do I do? So I quickly knocked an arrow. I drew back. I'm sitting there, I'm waiting, and one of them, so I'm literally behind, there's a tree right near where I am that's blocking me from them as they walk closer. And so they walk out and I took a shot at one. It was probably about 11 meters, I think I measured it out to be when I took the shot from, when I measured it out later. So I've taken this shot and I've lined it up. I was a bit nervous, I must admit. I was a bit nervous. I've taken the shot. I've placed it exactly where I thought I should have been. The issue was that I didn't stop the dog. So he's just walking and I've got him back. So it wasn't a bad shot, I would say, but it wasn't a great shot either. Like in the fact that he didn't die in front of my eyes. And what happened was I hit him and he tumbled. He screamed. It was actually a pretty terrible thing to watch. And I'll talk about this more in depth later, but it was kind of a pretty bad thing to watch. And I've seen him go, and as soon as I've seen that he's not going to probably go down straight away, I've tried to knock another arrow. At this point, he's seen me. He started running off. There's blood, there is a lot of blood, and he's dropping a heap as he runs. His mate literally saw him go down, and instead of trying to help him or do anything, he just took off. And so I think it was literally like it happened and then the deer started roaring, or they were roaring just beforehand, but I was already had my eyes on these other deer. And so he took off and I'm like, shit, what do? Maybe I'll quickly find that arrow. Maybe I'll blood track him. And then the deer, because they were roaring, I'm like, you know what? The best game plan is to actually go and get onto those deer first, because that's what you're here for, really. Go get onto the deer, come back. I can blood trail him later, and I can also find my arrow later. Don't worry about it so much now. Just get up this valley where they are. So I was like, okay, cool. That's perfect. Take off, get over. And this is pretty much where I'd left the deer the day before, where I'd seen them 2 a.m, essentially. They were sitting on this side of the ridge. So I get over there and I'm in the paddock and I'm like, I'm just going to do what James had told me to do, which is just letting out some roars, getting some return, and hopefully bring one in. So I get over to this paddock and I'm just trying to get closer to the sounds, closer to the roars. And there's 2 in the distance, and literally as I'm about to start making my way in, I think I was going to stop and give them some call-ins and see if they'd come back towards me, but or maybe I had already. I can't quite remember this, and I didn't write it down. I'm sorry for being a bit vague here. I feel like I got over the fence line. I let off a few calls and they kind of kept calling down the valley. So I was like, okay, I need to get closer to them. So I was still sneaking. I was still going reasonably quiet. And I got maybe like 50, no, it'd probably be like 100 meters into this paddock. And then there's one, literally probably, that's not very good English of me. Sorry, guys. But he would have been maybe like 100 meters, maybe 200 meters away from me, with the sound of where his roar was. And he was kind of on an angle up from me. And I'm like, this is perfect. This is my chance. So I started letting off some roars. And then, so he responded once to me. And then the other 2 down the valley are just going crazy. So they're pretty much battling between them. And I'd let off a roar every once in a while, but they would always respond as soon as I'd let off a roar. I'm like, okay, this is a good place. I think I'm doing something good here. I kept doing it for probably I think it would have been like a good 10 minutes. I was getting responses every time. But the guy up the hill from me, he'd gone quiet. He'd completely shut off. And so eventually when it got to like 5-10 minutes later, he wasn't responding. The two down the hill they were still responding. They're down the valley further. They're still fully responding. And I was like, oh, he's obviously like gotten scared and run off or something. Like maybe he's already found his girls, or he's just trying to protect his girls and he's gone the other way. I don't really know what's happening here. I'm like, I'm going to make my move and try to get to these last two, because I'm putting pressure on myself as this being my last day of hunting for that weekend. I'm like, I need to get up to where these guys are and get some eyes on them. And so I take literally 5 steps out into the open, because I was making sure I always had my back to some sort of bush or just breaking my outline somehow, based on when I drew back on that last year, I didn't have anything breaking my outline, and that's pretty much what let me down the time before. So I was like, okay, I need to make sure that's not happening. So I was in between these bushes and I take these 5 steps out and look up the hill. Like I was glassing it the whole way as I was going, and I took one more step. Look up, and I'm like, oh, that's a big rock. And I'm like, that's not a rock. Look up, glassed him, and he's looking straight at me. I'm like, fuck, what do I do? He turns away, so I quickly ducked down and took a few steps back down the hill. And then I just tried to get my eyes on him, and I just couldn't see him from there out. I let out a few more roars and nothing. I'm like, oh, fucked it. Once again, but it actually gave me a fair bit of confidence in my roars, because what had happened was, as far as I'm aware, he had shut up because he was coming down to try find me. He was coming down to try find me and fight me and figure out who I was and what I was and why I was trying to take his girls. So in that instance, I was like, hey, that's a win. That's a very productive thing from the weekend. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to start to make my way up to where these other guys are. I'm going to get my eyes on them. This is going to be perfect. So I take would have been like another 80 meters, 80 to 100 meters. And there is a hind and a spiker. They're sitting there, and I've bumped them. They've literally hopped up and run away. So I don't know if that's who this other guy was with that was up the hill very close to me, if that's who he was with or not. And they've just taken off up the hill. And I'm like, damn it. It just keeps happening. So from there, I'm like, I don't really know what to do. And then these boys just kept calling. So I'm like, that's my game plan then. I'm going for them. I went for them, and literally it would have been 5 minutes later, they just went quiet. And by this stage, I think they started up at about 6:30. So an hour after light, they started roaring. And then literally within half an hour, they had finished their roaring. Like, that's all they gave me that second day, compared to the day before when I got out of the car, and I think it was around like 4:30. And they kept going till about 8:30. So 4 hours of roaring compared to the half hour of roaring that next day. I was like, what is going on? Like, this is so bizarre. So I kept making my way through. And this part of the property is actually all new terrain for me where I'm heading, because I'd never actually confirmed with the property owner that was theirs. I always actually thought it was the neighbors. So I'd never actually been on this. So I'm kind of adventuring and seeing this property for the first time, looking out for deer the whole way that I go. And unfortunately just not getting any luck with getting eyes on them, or even hearing them again, which is a bit upsetting. But I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. I got to see this new part of the property. I got to have a deer come pretty close to me, like a bloke come pretty close to me in regards to he was checking me out to see what I was, maybe because I had a funny roar, or I'm not sure, but it was, in my eyes, that was a success. And I'm like, okay, it's time to go back and get to that dingo, find where he's at, and get my arrow back. So I go back and I put myself in my place of where I was, and just to kind of relive the situation so I can try to find where my arrow's gone. Literally where I've shot him is a blood pile. I don't know how to explain it. It would have been like a big circle. It would have been, I don't know, like it was big. It would have been like 45 centimeters across at least, maybe a little bit bigger. And he was like a good sized dingo, I'd say, is probably the best way to put it. And this is where I start to relive it. And this is where I start to really think about the dingo. And it's actually where I went wrong, I would think, is that I started to connect it probably a little bit too much to my dog and to dogs that I've had previously, just in the way that it yelped and it had to roll around in pain and then run off, and it was not running well at all when it ran off. So to me, I started to relive that situation, and in that time, I couldn't really disconnect myself from it, and it actually really upset me. It got me quite deep. Because obviously, if you've ever had a dog, you'll understand the bond that you do have with them, and there is a reason why they say that a dog is a man's best friend. My pup she's literally she's the best. I love her. She's so cool. She's such a quirky dog. Like, every dog has their own personality, but she is freaking out there. I don't know. We have a lot of fun. I'll wrestle with her. She's a Staffy Mastiff, and I'll wrestle with her and play games with her, and I'll roll her on her back. I do this thing, I roll her on her back, and I grab kind of from her cheeks down to her ears, so almost like a bit of jowls or whatever. And I'll be like, "Give me your noises," and she goes, "Ah." I'm like, "Where's your noises?" She's like, "Ah." I don't know. I just think it's hilarious. So with me, what the mistake I made was I connected it to my dog. And it really rolled me. I got to be honest, it was not pleasant at all. That whole situation of trying to find my arrow and trying to blood track this dingo and not really knowing if I'd done a good enough job or not, and just knowing how much pain that dingo would have been in. And even though it was a completely wild dog, and even though it had just come from the paddock where the cattle were, and I don't know if it actually did any damage to the cattle or not, but knowing that they are a complete pest, it was still just it was just a bit heart-wrenching on me. So I ended up blood tracking it for as far as I could. I was trying to search for my arrow first. I could not find my arrow anywhere. I was like, this is ridiculous. I need to stop losing arrows or breaking them, because I shoot where I shoot. My sidestep here. Where I shoot at home, my backdrop is a cement wall, which is great because no arrows ever going through it. But it also means that I bust through a few arrows if I ever miss. And recently I've changed to just using my broadheads when I shoot, and I don't miss often. But when I do miss, it's from 40 meters, and it's by a whisker. And unfortunately, I went from a bigger target to now a smaller target. And when I did that, I probably lost 2 more arrows. And so that was one chance. That was one time. I lost another few arrows when I was out in the bush. I'm like, this is ridiculous. So anyway, it's an expensive hobby, as we all know, obviously. So I figured out I couldn't find the arrow for right now. I'm like, okay, I'm going to find this dingo then. So I start blood trailing him, and there's thick blood. It's thick up until he goes through this little valley. And so I follow, I go through the valley, I come out of the valley. And when I say valley, I'm talking a little ditch, actually. He runs through the ditch, but it kind of splits off into maybe 3 different directions of where he could have gone. I follow up what I think is actually where he's gone, due to just the dirt seemed to be turned over more recently than any of the other trails. So I go up that way. I find a few specks of blood, and it becomes a lot lighter than what it had been up until that point. And the biggest issue that I had was that when I got to the other side here, there was, there's this, it's some sort of legume that they've got on the property. And when it starts to ripen, what happens is it goes red. So it's green with red, which is freaking terrible for when you're trying to blood track. So I kind of get over onto this section. I start looking around. I'm looking. I just cannot see where he's gone. So I just walked in the direction that I thought he would have gone. I started checking just underneath trees and checking just the little water patches. And I couldn't find anything around there. He actually, from where I can see he would have gone through another little creek bed, essentially, that had water in it. So I don't know if he's gone through that, and that would have made it even easier or even worse. But either way, I didn't end up finding the dingo, and it really kind of cut me down a fair bit because I was feeling really confident going into it with my shots. And ever since, like, there's always, like, hindsight's a great thing, right? Like, I should have just made like a little noise, a little sound, just to make him stop and question what it was, just for that second, so I could knock him off real quick. And I guess that's why we do it. That's where we learn, and that's where we get to build from. But it actually kind of rocked me in the sense that it gave me aversions to hunting for a little bit. And what I mean by this is that I'll typically watch, say, for instance, like different videos and different bits and pieces. And I got home, I think it was on the Sunday or the Monday, I was watching some Instagram stories because it's like prime season for everyone putting up all their best content because of the ruts. And one person I follow had a pig, had a boar that he'd caught in a trap. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And his next video was the boar tied up. I'm like, oh, yeah, like they're probably going to neuter it or whatever. And the following video was them showing the slitting of the throat and the blood just spurting. And I was like, oh, no, I'm not into that right now. Like, it was just like, it brought back the trauma from the weekend that I'd suffered, I guess. I don't know. But it was like, that was just a bit much. And then something happened later in the week. I was like, I need to watch a butchering video. So I jumped on and started watching butchering video, and I was like, oh, Jesus. Like, it was a bit much. Once again, it kind of just made me relive it a little bit. And I was like, wow, have I gone soft? Like, have I lost the love for doing this? I'm like, in my head, I'm like, there was no question of if I'd lost the love or not. But it was in my head, I was more like, no matter what happens right now, you need to make sure that you get back out there, and you need to make sure that you make it happen again. Like, that you get out and you get a good shot on, whether it's a dingo or whether it's a deer. Like, that is where you progress as a person right here, right now. Sitting back and quitting right now would be the absolute worst thing possible for you to do. And that was never a thing that was in my mind, but it was just more so that I had felt so bad about the situation. I actually talked to a few people about it, and they were like, dude, to be honest, like, it does happen to us. It does happen in the hunting world, and it happens to us bow hunters. And if you didn't feel like that, then we would be worried, because that would make you a psychopath. But the fact that you show so much remorse, and the fact that it does make you almost sick to the stomach, like, that is good evidence that that you're in it for the right reason. So, I mean, that kind of really made me a lot happier, I guess, being able to talk that out with people and have them have the same situations have happened to them before, and be able to, I guess, reminisce with me and say, hey, don't worry, like, that happens, and this is very similar to how I felt. And I think it was not but 2 weeks later, I was out again. I went out to the property again, and that was I think that was over Easter. And over Easter, it was raining like crazy. The winds were shit. And I walked around for pretty much like 3 or 4 days straight and didn't see a lot of sign. I did get up on 4 hinds, but as soon as I saw them, the wind just straight up my bum and straight into them, and they just ran off. And so that was kind of my luck for that weekend. And I ended up trying to find a whole heap of pigs that weekend, because there was a pig problem. So I went searching for them. But in the meantime, between like about a month previous where I'd been there and I'd seen some pigs, they'd trapped them. They'd put them in. They'd caught a heap of them in a trap, which it just seemed to have scared the rest off, which is unfortunate. So there wasn't really much sign of pigs. It might have just been because it was so wet and everything. Either when you find old poo, it doesn't really look like it's new anyway. So I just kind of, when it's wet, meaning it doesn't make it look new, but at the same time, you kind of just got to take it all. And there was nothing that seemed like it was new. There was no new diggings or anything like that. So I was like, oh, heck, whatever. So that weekend was a little bit of a letdown. I was like, I still really enjoyed it, but at the same time, it was one of those situations where I was like, damn it, like, pushing through this weekend was not necessarily what you needed to do, or it was not what solved the problem. So I was like, okay, I'm out here again in a fortnight, and that is getting into the start of May. It was the May Day long weekend. We had a family event, out there, and I was like, okay, this is kind of the last chance, and it's a family event, so there's a fair chance I'm not going to get a lot of time out. But when I go out, I'm sure it's going to be good. And this is when I took the guy out who's a rifle hunter, and we just had the worst luck with the wind. But we actually did come across a deer, and unfortunately, by this stage, it was when we were on our way home. We were like, oh, fuck it, they're not about today. Let's head home. So we started walking back to the car, and as we were trekking, we kind of came across this section where it was just thick lantana, and we're like, that actually looks like pretty good bedding down area. Like, this seems like it's a pretty good deer spot right here. Let's keep that in mind. We might come back and visit it tomorrow. And where I was trying to show him was another section where the deer usually are, but the winds were just that bad. So I was like, dude, we just got to get out of here. So we started walking back, and it wasn't without care, but it wasn't with enough care that we should have seen this guy. And unfortunately, we're walking, and we came out into the open, and all of a sudden the stag hops up and runs up the hill. And I actually didn't see him to start with. The other guy did, and he yelled out to me. He's like, Matty, Matty, Matty. So I quickly turn around, and here he is, just big old boy running up the hill. And he's like, what do we do? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't think we can actually go and track him now based on how bad the winds have been. And when we're at the top of that hill, just probably a good 20 minutes beforehand, it was blowing straight up in our faces. When we got to the bottom of the hill, though, it was kind of blowing the opposite direction. So I was like, look, there's a fair chance that we start to walk around and the wind changes. Or we could go up this hill and he's not actually even going to be there. It's getting pretty close to dark as well. I'm like, dude, I think if we put too much pressure on him today, we're going to stuff all chances that we have of tomorrow. So we decided to call it quits. We packed up, we went in, and got back. It must have been, I think it was just after dark. So we got back and told a little story of seeing our big bloke, and unfortunately that was about all we got to say. The next day we went out and we had a wonderful walk, but no viewings at all. And that kind of actually brings a wrap to my whole rut season, I guess. So I guess the big learnings are, or the big takeaways are, the things I can try to give you guys, because realistically the reason why I did this is because I've been talking to a few of you guys on Instagram, and you'd kind of said, hey, I'd love to hear the stories that you have from your rut experience or your raw experience. So the things that I would say is book yourself some time to be there. Try to have like a solid 7 days if you can. If you get it done on day one, that's incredible. You've then got a heap of extra time in the bush, or you've got the time to at least be able to put into these animals, I guess, and make sure you're getting a good, decent amount of time to scope out the area and actually see them in action. The other thing is that so many people booked a week away this year and didn't hear anything, or it was like quieter than usual because it was just the wrong week. So that's obviously a hard thing, and that's why I was saying I wish I'd written down a little bit more as to if it was cooler or not. And there was definitely a cold spike around that time. This must have been around the first or second weekend of April. I think it was the second weekend of April, to be honest. I don't have a calendar in front of me, but I have a feeling it was around like the 11th or something like that. And it was, I'm pretty sure that was the week after or the week of that cold spike that came through. And that seems to be when they kind of started getting up and getting after it. Anyway, something I forgot to mention is the day after I'd shot the dingo, I got home and it was the day of. My auntie sent me a video, and it was just of the night or the afternoon that I'd been there, and it was literally of the sound of all the deer, just added it again. So that afternoon they were roaring, and she said that they were out there for a good hour and a half in the paddocks, in the yards, and they were going nonstop for that a whole hour and a half that they were there. So it kind of, I don't think there is a pattern to it, unfortunately. It's just getting out there and being amongst it. But I think having the time out there is going to be the biggest thing that you can do to make yourself set up for success. The other thing I do is I would say practice your calls. Like, listen out, jump on YouTube, check out what red deer sound like. Jump back to that episode that I did with James and hear what the red deer sound like when he roared, when they barked. Try to get your head around some hind calls. if you can, because they're all going to help when you're out and about and in the midst of it. To this date, I still don't have a red deer, so I can't, maybe my words can't even be taken as a very serious thing, but I'm just trying to pass on what my experience was. And like I said, I built my confidence a little bit with my raw based on the fact that he started coming into me. And so if I was to redo that whole situation, what I would have done is that very first morning, once I'd found my good placement, is start to call the raws and see if they were coming in. And then I would have kept playing it out, however it went from there. But that's it, guys. I'm going to call that a wrap. It's getting late at night. I need to go have some dinner. I hope you guys are all well. I hope you're doing incredibly well. It's cool to still have you guys here. I've really enjoyed the experience so far. It is very time-consuming running a podcast, and I'm trying not to let it interfere, or trying not to let life interfere with the podcast as such. So still trying to make sure that I'm getting you guys content weekly. Really loving the outreach once again. You guys have been really cool. I really enjoy talking to all you and having the different stories come through, and the different chats on Instagram. It's really cool. So if you're thinking about picking up a bow, do it straight away. It's going to be one of the best things you've ever done for yourself. For those who are shooting a bow, keep after it, guys. Just keep heckling at it. Keep the persistence rolling, because I think that's where we're all going to come good, and that's where we're going to be lucky. Next week, I do have some folk from overseas, actually. So I've got a guy from, he's in New York, actually. And so we talk from whitetail to turkey. We talk about bear. We kind of talk about a lot of things. It's actually really cool. It's kind of, probably didn't head in the direction I thought it was going to, but it was actually really cool. So stick out for that. His name is Tyler. He is hitting, I will get there eventually. I just need to find my page. on Instagram, he is Hit Outdoors, or he is at Hitting the Dream on Instagram. But yeah, jump across, check him out before we get out there. So that's next week's episode. Otherwise, guys, if you do have any questions, please do reach out to me. On Instagram is probably the best place. I don't really check the Facebook page too much. Head across, check out the YouTube channel if you haven't already. There's a few different videos up there. I haven't had the time to put into it that I would have liked recently, but there is some good recipe videos up there that I'd strongly recommend you try. In particular, like I said, if you're trying to get someone else into venison. I gave it to people at that family party I was talking about, and they were like, "Oh my God, this is delicious. What is it?" And it was the massaman curry that I'd made. So I said masala at the start, but it was actually a massaman. So yeah, it was that recipe that I gave them, and they were blown away. Even my auntie, who said that she'll never eat deer, ate it just because she thought it was like pulled lamb or pulled beef or something. And she tried it, and she was like, "Oh, that was deer? Oh my God, that was so good." So, yeah, I would say head across, try that out. I think it's delicious. It's actually kind of become one of my staples at the moment. And other than that, team, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your first little stories of hunting. If you could send through a little voice clip, I think that'd be really cool. If you want to tag me in anything on Instagram, it's just at becomingabowhunter.podcast. And yeah, I'd love to hear from you guys. Thanks heaps. Peace out. That's it. That's a wrap, guys. Thank you so much for joining us this week. If you have not already, please do hit subscribe. If you want to leave us a great little review, that would also be highly appreciated. However, follow along with our journey at becomingabowhunter.podcast on Instagram and Facebook. You can also check out our website, which is www.becomingabowhunter.com. And if you want to email me of any guests or any questions that you would like answered on the podcast, then you can get in touch with me via email at matty@becomingabowhunter.com. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. Make sure you join us next week. Big love from us at Becoming a Bowhunter.